The alarm hit me before I even opened my eyes. 3 short bursts, then a 4th long one. That pattern only meant one thing on this ship: core instability near the royal wing. My name is Eli Hart, and I am the lowest-ranked engineer on a vessel that does not belong to my species. I rolled out of my bunk, grabbed my tool belt, and ran through the narrow human quarters before my mind had even caught up with my legs. Humans were given the smallest corridors on the threshold, tucked far from anything that mattered. We were tolerated, not respected. 3 years after the war ended, most of the Veyron crew still looked at us the way you look at something you stepped in by accident. The comm in my ear crackled. It was Ferris, the shift controller, a Veyron officer who never once used my name if he could avoid it. Human Unit 4, report to Sublevel 2, restricted access, immediately. Restricted access. My stomach dropped. Sublevel 2 restricted access was not a maintenance zone. It was the private wing of the royal family. Nobody from the lower decks was allowed anywhere near it, not even to breathe the air. I want to be clear, before I go any further, that I did not ask for this. Nobody in their right mind asks to walk into the one place on the entire ship that could get them killed for simply being seen there. I keyed my comm as I ran. "Confirm the order," I said. "Sublevel 2, are you certain?" "Confirmed," Ferris snapped back. "The failure is in the power distribution node beneath the princess's chamber. Every certified Veyron technician is currently occupied with the reactor breach on Deck 1. You are the only one available. Fix it and leave. Do not look at anything. Do not touch anything that is not the node. Do you understand me, human?" "I understand," I said, though understanding and liking something are very different animals. I sprinted through 3 checkpoints. The guards at each one stared at me like I had grown a second head, but my clearance code, temporary and glowing red on their scanners, waved me through. Red meant emergency access. Red meant even they could not stop me, though I could tell by their expressions that they wanted to. The corridor to the royal wing was nothing like the rest of the ship. The walls were smooth and pale gold, lit from somewhere underneath the floor, so that everything looked like it was floating. My boots felt too loud against the quiet. I slowed my breathing and told myself the same thing I always told myself in tense moments. Just do the job. Fix it and leave. Nobody has to notice you at all. The access hatch to the power node was exactly where the schematic said it would be, set into the floor just outside a tall door with no handle, only a soft blue seal glowing across its surface. That seal, I knew even without being told, marked the private chamber of Princess Visara, second heir to the Veyron throne. I had seen her only twice before, both times from a distance, both times surrounded by so many guards and advisors that she looked more like a walking monument than a person. I knelt down and pried open the access hatch. The moment I lifted the panel, sparks jumped out and bit my glove. The node was worse than they had described. Cracked casing, a coolant line hissing steam, and worst of all, the whole thing was overheating fast enough that I could see the metal starting to warp. "If this goes," I muttered to myself, "it is not just going to trip a breaker. It is going to blow straight up through the floor." Straight up through the floor meant straight into the chamber behind that sealed door. I had exactly one choice, and it was not a comfortable one. I needed to vent the pressure from the secondary valve, and the secondary valve was inside the wall panel just past the sealed door, not outside it. Every training module I had ever taken told me to call for backup and wait. But there was no backup. Every certified technician was busy, and the metal above me was already glowing faint orange at the edges. I stood, pressed my palm against the emergency override panel beside the sealed door, and prayed to every version of luck I had ever believed in. The seal blinked once, twice, then dissolved into a thin mist, and the door slid open with a soft hiss. I stepped inside, already talking, already trying to explain myself before anyone could accuse me of anything. "Emergency override," I said loudly. "Power failure below the floor. I need 30 seconds at the wall panel, and then I am gone. I promise, I am not here to—" The words died somewhere in my throat. The room was not what I expected. It was simple, almost bare. nothing like the golden hallway outside, and standing in the middle of it, frozen mid-motion, with both hands still raised toward her own face, was Princess Visara. Except she did not look like the princess I had seen in the hallways. The version of her that stood before crowds wore a smooth, polished appearance, pale lavender skin, sharp, elegant features, the kind of face built for portraits and formal announcements. The woman in front of me now had none of that. Her true skin was a deep blue, almost black in the low light, patterned with faint silver markings that shifted like slow-moving water. Her eyes, without whatever covering she normally wore, were larger, darker, and full of something I recognized instantly because I had felt it myself more times than I could count. Fear. Her hands were still raised, holding a thin, circular device that had clearly been resting against her real face, only a heartbeat before I walked in. That device, I understood in that instant, was not decoration. It was a mask, a disguise she wore every day so that no one, not even her own people, ever saw what she truly looked like underneath. And I had just walked in and seen everything. Her shock was evident in a way that needed no translation across species. Her whole body had gone rigid. The device slipped an inch from her fingers before she caught it again. Her mouth opened, but no sound came out at first, just a short, sharp breath that sounded almost like pain. I froze exactly where I stood, one hand still on the doorframe, my heart slamming so hard against my ribs that I was sure she could hear it too. Neither of us moved. Neither of us spoke. The room felt smaller with every passing second, the air thick enough to choke on. Behind me, beneath the floor, the power node let out a groan of metal that neither of us could ignore, a warning that time was already running out even before either of us figured out what to do about the much larger problem now standing between us. I had come here to fix a machine. Instead, in the space of 3 seconds, I had uncovered the single most protected secret on the entire ship, and there was no way, none at all, to pretend that I had not. Visara took one step back, her true eyes locked onto mine, wide and dark and full of a fear that had nothing to do with the sparks or the smoke curling up from the floor behind me. "Guard," she finally whispered, her voice cracking on the word. Guard. And somewhere down the golden corridor, I heard boots begin to move. For a moment, neither of us breathed. The princess stood frozen, with her hand still curled around the thin silver device, the one that had until seconds ago been pressed against her real face. I stood just as frozen in the doorway, half in the hallway and half in a room I was never supposed to enter. Behind me, the power node let out another groan, sharper this time, and orange light flickered up through the gap in the floor panel. That sound was the only thing that managed to break through the fear locking both of us in place. "Guard," she called out again, but her voice was thinner now, less certain. I raised both hands slowly, the way you do when you want to prove you mean no harm, except my hands were still covered in soot and sparks from the busted node. "Please," I said, keeping my voice as calm and steady as I could force it to be. "I am not here to hurt you. I am not here for anything except that." I pointed toward the smoking gap in the floor. "That node is about to fail. If it fails while we are standing here arguing, it will not just hurt me. It could tear straight through this floor." She did not lower her hands, but she did not call out again either. Her large dark eyes moved from my face to the smoke rising behind me, then back to my face, weighing something I could not read. "You should not be here," she said. Her voice, without whatever device usually altered it for public appearances, was lower and rougher than the polished tone I had heard from a distance before. "No one is permitted here. No one is permitted to see me like this." "I understand that now," I said. "I did not choose this. I was ordered here because every other technician on this ship was needed somewhere else. I swear to you, on anything you want me to swear on, I am not a spy, and I am not here to expose you." The boots in the corridor grew louder. She glanced toward the door, then toward the small silver mask still resting in her palm, and I watched something shift behind her real eyes, a decision forming faster than I expected from someone who looked as frightened as she did. If they see me like this, she said quickly, almost to herself, they will report it before I can explain anything. They will assume the worst. They already look for reasons to remove me from the succession line. I did not fully understand what she meant, not yet, but I understood enough. Whatever I had walked into was bigger than one secret about her appearance. It was tangled up with politics and power and things far above my pay grade, but right now, none of that mattered as much as the two problems standing directly in front of us, one glowing hot beneath the floor and one marching down the hallway with armed boots. "Put the mask on," I said. "Quickly. I will handle the door." She blinked at me, clearly not expecting help from the one person who had just seen the thing she guarded most closely, but she did not argue. Her fingers moved fast, practiced, clearly a motion she had done thousands of times before, and within seconds, the smooth lavender face I had seen in public appearances settled back over her true one, like nothing had ever happened. I turned toward the open door just as the guard captain rounded the corner, a tall, broad-shouldered Veyron officer with dark red markings across his uniform collar. His eyes went straight to me, narrowing with immediate suspicion. "Human," he barked. "What is your purpose here?" "Emergency repair," I said quickly, stepping fully into the corridor so that he would look at me instead of past me into the room. "Power node failure, directly beneath the princess's chamber. I was ordered here by Ferris himself. Check your comms if you do not believe me." The captain's eyes flicked toward the smoke curling out of the hatch behind me, then back toward the open chamber door, where Visera now stood with her mask fully in place, her expression cool and composed, every trace of the fear I had seen only moments earlier completely erased. "Is everything acceptable, Princess?" the captain asked, his tone shifting instantly from suspicion to formal respect the moment he addressed her directly. "Everything is acceptable, Draven," she answered smoothly. The technician startled me, nothing more. "He is finishing an emergency repair beneath my floor. I would like it completed quickly and without further interruption." Draven studied me for another long moment, clearly unconvinced but unwilling to argue with the princess directly. "Finish your repair," he said to me, "and then you will report to my office before your shift ends. I want a full account of what you saw and did here." "Understood," I said, my heart still hammering. He gave one more suspicious glance toward the chamber, then turned and barked orders at the two guards behind him to resume their normal posts. The three of them retreated back down the corridor, though I noticed Draven glancing over his shoulder twice before disappearing around the bend. The moment they were gone, I dropped back to my knees beside the access hatch, working fast, hands shaking slightly from adrenaline as I reached past the cracked casing to find the secondary valve. The metal burned through my glove, even with the protective lining, but I gritted my teeth and twisted it hard until the pressure finally released with a long hiss of steam. The orange glow faded from the edges of the metal. The groaning stopped. I let out a breath I did not realize I had been holding. When I looked up, Visera was standing in the doorway of her chamber, watching me with an expression I could not quite place. Not fear anymore. Something closer to confusion, maybe even curiosity. "You could have exposed me," she said quietly. "You could have called out. You could have told Draven exactly what you saw. It would have made you valuable to certain people on this ship." I closed the access panel and stood, wiping soot from my hands onto my already ruined uniform. "I am not interested in being valuable to people who would use something like that against you," I said. "Where I come from, walking in on someone's private moment and then using it against them is not considered brave. It is considered cruel." She tilted her head slightly, studying me, the way you might study a puzzle piece that did not seem to fit the picture you thought you were building. "Your species is strange," she said, not unkindly. "Maybe," I said, "but I would rather be strange than dangerous." Something flickered behind her composed expression, gone as quickly as it appeared. She glanced down the empty corridor where the guards had gone, then back at me. "You should go before Draven grows more suspicious," she said, "but this conversation is not finished. I need to know exactly what you intend to do with what you have seen. I intend to forget it, I said honestly. I have enough problems of my own without adding a member of a royal family to the list. She almost smiled at that, a small shift at the corner of her mouth that vanished the moment she noticed I had seen it. Perhaps, she said softly, we will find out. I gathered my tools, gave a short, respectful nod, and walked back out through the golden corridor toward the checkpoints, my mind spinning the entire way. I had gone in to fix a broken machine. I had walked out, having accidentally uncovered the greatest secret of a woman who could have my life ended with a single word, and yet had chosen, for reasons I did not fully understand, not to use that word against me. I told myself over and over that this was the end of it. Fix the problem, keep my mouth shut, move on with my life. I did not yet know that Draven had already sent a private message to someone far more dangerous than himself, someone who had been waiting a long time for exactly this kind of opportunity, and that the quiet moment I had just shared with the princess had already set something much larger into motion. 3 days passed, and I told myself the whole event was finished. I fixed the node, I kept my mouth shut, and Draven never actually called me to his office, though I caught him watching me twice across the mess hall with a look that made my skin crawl. I convinced myself that silence meant safety. I was wrong. On the 4th night, a message arrived on my personal terminal with no sender listed, only a short string of numbers that I recognized after a moment as coordinates for a private meeting room on sublevel 2. My hands went cold reading it. Nobody sent unmarked messages on this ship unless they wanted something to stay off the record entirely. I almost deleted it. I almost told myself that whatever this was, it was not worth the risk. But curiosity, or maybe something closer to responsibility, pulled me toward the door instead. The meeting room was small, tucked behind a maintenance corridor I did not even know existed until that night. When I stepped inside, Vessera was already there, standing near a narrow window that looked out onto open stars, her mask fully in place, her posture straight and formal, though her fingers were laced together tightly in front of her in a way that told me she was not as calm as she wanted to appear. "You came," she said. "I was not sure I had a choice," I answered honestly. An unmarked message from the princess is not something a lowly maintenance worker ignores. A small huff of amusement escaped her, quickly controlled. "I need to understand something, Eli Hart," she said, my full name sounding strange in her careful, measured voice. "I need to understand why a human who could have gained enormous favor by exposing me chose instead to protect a secret that means nothing to him." "It was not nothing," I said. "It meant everything to you. That was enough reason for me." She studied me for a long moment, the same way she had studied me after the repair, like I was a puzzle, refusing to resolve into a familiar shape. "Among my people," she said slowly, "weakness is currency. If a noble discovers another noble's vulnerability, they do not protect it. They collect it, and later they spend it. My own brother has built half his influence from secrets exactly like the one you now hold. I do not want currency," I said. "I want to keep my head attached to my shoulders and go home someday. That is the whole of my ambition." Something in her posture eased slightly at that, though her expression remained composed. "Then we understand each other," she said. "Because I intend to make certain nothing happens to you as a result of what occurred. I do not yet know how, but I intend it." "I appreciate that," I said, and I meant it more than my simple words could carry. But before either of us could say anything further, a soft chime sounded from her wrist device, and her expression shifted instantly from careful warmth to something sharper, more alert. "Someone is accessing the private communication logs from sublevel 2, she murmured, reading the small display. "That access point should be restricted to myself alone." "Who would have the clearance for that?" I asked. Her eyes lifted to mine, and for the first time since I had met her, I saw real worry cross her features, worry that had nothing to do with her disguise. "Only 3 people carry that level of clearance," she said. "Myself, my father the Emperor, and my brother Kale." The name meant nothing to me yet, but the tension in her voice told me it should have. My brother has wanted the throne since the day our father named me heir instead of him, she continued. He has spent years searching for any weakness he could use to remove me from the succession. If Draven reported anything unusual from that night, even something small, Kale will not rest until he understands exactly what happened in my chamber. I felt the cold settle deeper into my chest. So this is not over, I said. It has only begun, she answered. We agreed that night to be careful, to act as though nothing unusual had occurred, and to trust no one beyond the two of us with what we now shared. I walked back to my bunk through empty corridors, replaying her words the entire way, and told myself once again that surely the danger would pass quietly if I simply kept my head down and did my work. 2 days later, I learned exactly how wrong that assumption was. I was assigned a routine coolant check in the lower engineering deck, a job I had done 100 times without incident. The deck was mostly empty at that hour, lit by long strips of pale blue light running along the ceiling, humming quietly with the sound of distant machinery. I moved through my checklist without much thought, running diagnostic scans on the coolant lines that fed the ship's secondary reactor. I noticed the first wrong thing almost too late. The access door behind me, the one leading back toward the main corridor, sealed shut with a soft mechanical click that should not have happened during a routine check. I turned toward it, frowning, and tried my access code. Nothing. The panel flashed red, denied, over and over, no matter how many times I entered it. Then the lights along the ceiling flickered once, and the temperature in the room began to climb. I checked the nearest display panel with rising alarm and understood immediately what was happening. Someone had remotely triggered an emergency thermal vent sequence, the kind normally used to clear dangerous gas buildup by flooding a sealed compartment with superheated steam before venting it into space. It was meant to be used only in true emergencies, and only with the compartment fully evacuated first. I was not evacuated. I was locked inside. My heart slammed against my ribs as I scrambled toward the manual override panel on the far wall, my mind racing through every safety protocol I had ever learned. The panel required a physical keycard that only senior engineering staff carried, a card I did not have. The steam vents along the ceiling hissed once, a warning pulse before full activation, and the temperature display ticked upward another 5 degrees. I forced myself to think instead of panic. Every system on this ship had a secondary pathway, a maintenance shortcut built in for exactly this kind of failure, because even the Veyron, for all their advanced technology, knew that systems sometimes failed and someone trapped inside needed a way out that did not require a perfect keycard. I dropped to my knees beside the floor grate nearest the reactor coolant line, the same type of access hatch I had used outside the princess's chamber only days earlier, and pried it open with my multi-tool. Beneath it ran a narrow maintenance shaft, barely wide enough for a person to crawl through, leading toward the ventilation network that threaded through the entire lower deck. The steam vents activated fully behind me just as I dropped into the shaft, a wall of heat rushing past close enough that I felt it scorch the back of my uniform even as I scrambled forward on my hands and knees through the cramped darkness. I moved as fast as the tight space allowed, my breath ragged, my palms scraped raw against the rough metal walls, following the only pathway I could remember from the ship schematics I had memorized during training. Somewhere behind me, the shaft grew hot enough that sweat poured down my face, despite the narrow gap between myself and the vented steam. I pushed harder, ignoring the burn in my arms and knees, focused entirely on the junction point I knew lay ahead, a wider section where the maintenance shaft connected to the main ventilation trunk and, hopefully, to breathable air and an exit. I reached the junction just as my vision started to blur from the heat and the effort, and I dropped through the opening into the wider trunk, gasping in air that was still hot but no longer scalding. I lay there for a moment, chest heaving, before forcing myself back onto my hands and knees and crawling toward the nearest exit grate I could remember from the schematics. When I finally kicked the grate loose and dropped out into a side corridor, alarms were already blaring through the ship, red emergency lights spinning along the walls. I collapsed against the corridor wall, coughing, my uniform scorched and torn, my hands shaking so hard I could barely hold myself upright. It took several minutes before a security team found me there, and several more before I understood, through their confused and suspicious questioning, that the emergency vent sequence in that engineering compartment had never actually been triggered by any real gas leak. Someone had activated it manually, remotely, and had locked the compartment door at the exact same moment I entered for my routine check. Someone had tried to kill me. I did not need to guess who had ordered it. I understood the moment Draven arrived personally to oversee the investigation, his expression carefully blank in a way that told me he already knew more than he was saying. Later that night, hidden in the shadow of an unused storage corridor, Vessera found me before I found her. She looked at my scorched uniform and the raw scrapes along my arms with an expression that had abandoned all pretense of composure. "My brother," she said quietly, her voice trembling with something between fury and fear. "He knows something happened. He does not yet know exactly what, but he suspects enough to consider you a loose end worth removing." "I nearly died today," I said, my own voice rough from the smoke I had inhaled, "because of a secret I never asked to learn." "I know," she said, "and I will not allow it to happen again. How do you intend to stop a prince with more power and more spies than either of us?" I asked. She was quiet for a long moment, staring down the empty corridor as though she could see her brother's schemes unfolding somewhere beyond it. "I do not know yet," she admitted finally, "but I know that hiding will no longer be enough. If Kale believes you are simply a maintenance worker who knows nothing, he will eventually decide it is safer to remove you, regardless of what you actually saw. The only way to protect you now is to make certain he understands that harming you would cost him more than he is willing to pay." That sounded, to my exhausted and aching mind, like a plan built entirely out of hope rather than substance. But looking at her in that shadowed corridor, her disguise cracked at the edges by real fear for the first time since I had known her, I found myself believing that she meant every word of it, and that whatever came next, we were no longer facing it separately. I expected Kale to come at us quietly, the way a hidden blade finds its mark in the dark. Instead, 5 days after the incident in the engineering deck, he did something far bolder. He called for a formal council hearing, open to every ranking officer on the ship, and demanded that Princess Vessera answer publicly for what he called an unusual pattern of behavior involving a human maintenance worker. I learned about the hearing the same way most of the crew did, through a ship-wide announcement that named me directly. Hearing my own name broadcast across every deck of a massive alien warship is not an experience I would recommend to anyone hoping for a quiet life. My hands were shaking again by the time I finished reading the announcement twice over. Marcus Bello, the senior human engineer who had trained me when I first came aboard, found me staring blankly at my terminal an hour later. He was older than me by a decade, gray at the temples, and had survived on this ship longer than any other human by making himself as unremarkable as possible. "You look like a man who just heard his own execution notice," Marcus said, dropping into the seat across from me. "Close enough," I muttered. I told him everything then. The node, the door, what I had seen, the vent trap, and finally the hearing that now threatened to drag the whole tangled mess into the light in front of the entire ship. Marcus listened without interrupting, his expression growing more troubled with every detail. When I finished, he rubbed a hand across his face and let out a long breath. "You understand what a hearing like this actually means," he said. "It is not really about you. Kale does not care about one human technician. He is using you as a lever to pry Vessera's credibility loose in front of the officers whose support she needs to keep her claim to the throne secure. If he can make it look like she has been secretly meeting with humans, hiding things from the council, breaking protocol, it damages her standing regardless of what actually happened. So I am a weapon being pointed at someone else," I said. That is usually how it works for people like us, Marcus said, not unkindly. The trick is surviving being used as one. The hearing took place the following evening in the largest chamber I had ever seen on the ship. A wide circular room with tiered seating rising on all sides, filled with officers, nobles, and advisors in formal dress, their eyes cold and curious all at once as I was escorted in by 2 guards. I had never felt smaller in my entire life than I did walking across that open floor toward the raised platform where the council waited. Princess Visara stood already positioned to one side of the platform, her mask perfectly composed, her posture rigid and formal. Across from her stood a Veyron I had never seen before, tall and lean, with sharp calculating eyes and an easy, confident smile that did not reach those eyes at all. I did not need an introduction to know this was Kale. The presiding council elder, an elderly Veyron with pale silver markings and a slow, deliberate voice, called the hearing to order and read the accusation aloud for the record. Prince Kale alleges that Princess Visara engaged in unauthorized private contact with a human maintenance worker, granted him unusual access to restricted areas, and concealed the nature of these interactions from proper oversight, in potential violation of royal conduct codes. Kale stepped forward smoothly, addressing the council with practiced ease. "I do not raise this accusation lightly," he said, his tone dripping with false reluctance. "I raise it because our people deserve a ruler whose conduct is transparent, whose loyalties are clear, and whose judgment cannot be questioned. If my sister has nothing to hide, she should have no difficulty explaining why a lowly human technician was granted private access to her personal chamber, not once, but on multiple occasions since." Murmurs spread through the tiered seating. I felt every eye in the room shift toward me, and I forced myself to stand straight, despite the urge to shrink into nothing. Vesera's voice, when she finally spoke, was steady in a way that impressed me even through my own fear. "The technician in question," she said, "was summoned for an emergency repair beneath my chamber, ordered not by myself but by the shift controller on duty that night, due to a genuine power failure that threatened structural damage. Any subsequent contact was limited to matters of my personal safety following an unexplained attempt on his life in the engineering deck. An attempt I believe my brother knows a great deal more about than he has admitted to this council." The room erupted into low murmurs again, sharper this time. Kale's easy smile flickered, just slightly, before he recovered it. "A serious accusation," he said smoothly, offered without any evidence beyond the word of a sister eager to distract from her own irregular conduct. The council elder raised a hand for quiet, then turned his slow gaze toward me. "Human," he said, his voice carrying easily across the silent chamber. "You are present. You will answer directly. Did the princess grant you access to restricted areas for any reason beyond emergency repair?" Every instinct I had told me to lie small, to shrink the truth down into something safe and unremarkable. But looking at Visara standing rigid and alone against her own brother's calculated attack, I understood that a small, careful lie would not be enough to protect either of us. It would only leave gaps that Kale could tear wider later. I stepped forward. "No," I said clearly. "I was never granted access beyond what emergency protocol required. What happened afterward, I was not free to refuse. When someone attempted to kill me in a supposedly routine maintenance area, the princess took an interest in ensuring the person responsible was found, because a failed assassination attempt aboard this ship reflects poorly on ship security, regardless of who the intended target happens to be. I deliberately steered every word around the true secret, the mask, the real face beneath it, keeping my account focused entirely on the assassination attempt instead, because that was a truth I could tell without betraying her." Kale's expression sharpened. "And who, precisely, do you believe attempted to end your life, human?" he asked, his voice carrying a dangerous edge now beneath the smooth control. "I do not know for certain," I said honestly. "I only know the vent sequence was triggered manually and remotely by someone with access privileges far beyond a simple maintenance worker's clearance." I would very much like the Council to investigate that fact directly, since an unexplained assassination attempt within restricted engineering systems seems, to me, a far more urgent concern than where a technician happened to be standing on any given night. A ripple of agreement moved through several officers in the tiered seating, and I saw Cale's jaw tighten almost imperceptibly before he mastered his expression again. The council elder studied the room for a long moment before speaking. "This hearing was called to examine conduct," he said slowly, "but a serious allegation of attempted murder aboard this vessel cannot be dismissed, regardless of its origin. I direct ship security to investigate the vent incident fully, and I direct this council to reconvene once findings are presented. Until then, no further action will be taken against the princess or the human technician on the basis of unproven accusations." Cale's composure held, barely, though I caught the flash of frustration beneath his calm mask before he bowed formally to the council and stepped back. As the hearing dissolved into murmured conversation and officers began filing out, his eyes found mine across the emptying chamber, and the look he gave me was not one of a man defeated. It was the look of a man recalculating. Vessera found me afterward in a quiet side corridor, her formal posture finally loosening into something closer to relief, though the tension never fully left her shoulders. "You did not expose me," she said quietly. "Even with everything on the line, even with your own life clearly at risk, you protected the one truth that mattered most." "I told the truth about everything except the part that was not mine to tell," I said. "That seemed like the only honest option left." She studied me with an expression I still could not fully name, something between gratitude and a growing wariness of her own feelings. "My brother will not accept this outcome quietly," she said. "He has only been delayed, not stopped. Whatever he intends next, it will be more dangerous than an accusation in a council chamber." I believed her completely, and the memory of steam hissing through a locked engineering compartment was more than enough to remind me exactly how far Cale was willing to go. Neither of us said it aloud, but I think we both understood, standing there in that quiet corridor while the council chamber emptied around us, that whatever final move Cale intended to make, it was coming soon, and it would likely put far more than just my life at risk. Cale's next move came 3 days later, and it came in a way neither of us had predicted, striking not at me directly, and not at Vessera through another accusation, but at the entire ship itself. I was midway through a routine shift when every alarm on the threshold screamed at once, a deep pulsing tone I had never heard before, one that made every Veyron officer around me go pale beneath their markings. The overhead display flashed a single line of text in bold red characters across every screen on the ship. "Primary reactor containment failure. Full ship evacuation protocol engaged." Marcus grabbed my arm before I could even process the words fully. "That is not a drill," he said, his voice tight. "That is the worst possible failure this ship can suffer. If the primary reactor loses containment, we lose the whole vessel. Everyone aboard it. Gone in minutes." I ran with him toward the nearest engineering terminal, shoving through crowds of panicked crew members flooding toward the evacuation pods, and pulled up the reactor diagnostics with hands that would not quite stop shaking. What I found on that screen made my blood run cold in an entirely different way than fear of an accident. This was not a failure. Every safety interlock on the containment system had been deliberately disabled, one by one, in a precise sequence that only someone with the highest level of engineering access could have executed. "Someone did this on purpose," I said. Marcus stared at the screen, his face grim. "And they timed it perfectly," he said. "Full evacuation means every officer, every guard, every witness will be off this ship within the hour. Anyone left behind to attempt a manual shutdown will either die trying or be blamed for the failure itself when the wreckage is investigated afterward." I understood immediately who benefited most from that outcome. Cale would finally have his sister discredited, or dead, the ship's destruction blamed on sabotage from below decks, and a convenient human scapegoat already sitting in the historical record thanks to a council hearing just days earlier. I found Vesera on the command deck, still in her formal appearance despite the chaos, directing evacuation orders to remaining crew with a calm authority that impressed me even in the middle of catastrophe. The moment she saw my face, she understood I brought worse news than the alarm itself. "This is not an accident," I told her quickly, pulling her aside from the crowd of fleeing officers. "Someone manually disabled every containment safeguard. Whoever did this wanted the ship abandoned exactly like this, in a panic, with no one left to stop it." Her expression hardened instantly. "Kale," she said, no hesitation in her voice at all. "I believe so," I said. "But belief will not shut down that reactor. Someone has to physically restore the containment sequence before it fully collapses, and from what the diagnostics showed, we have less than 20 minutes before that becomes impossible." 20 minutes, she repeated, and I watched her make a decision in real time, the same kind of fast, decisive choice I remembered from the night she chose to trust me instead of calling for guards. "Then we do not have time to argue about who should attempt it." "We," I said. "Not you. This is not survivable if it goes wrong, and you are the heir to an entire empire. I am also the only person aboard with clearance codes high enough to override my brother's tampering without needing hours to bypass the security locks he installed," she said firmly. "You know the physical systems better than any officer left aboard. Together, we might have a chance. Alone, either of us would fail." There was no time left to argue further, and honestly, some part of me already knew she was right. We ran together through corridors emptying rapidly of fleeing crew, down toward the reactor core access point buried deep in the lower decks, the pulsing red alarm growing louder and more urgent with every level we descended. The reactor chamber itself was enormous, a vast cylindrical space dominated by the massive glowing core suspended in its containment field. Except that field was flickering now, weak and unstable, casting jagged shadows of light across the chamber walls. The heat inside was already noticeable, even from the entrance, a dry, oppressive warmth that promised far worse the closer we approached. Vesera moved straight to the primary control console, her fingers flying across the interface with practiced precision as she input a long sequence of override codes. "Half the panels remain locked," she said, frustration creeping into her voice for the first time. Kale embedded a secondary authorization requirement, something beyond even my own clearance level. I dropped to the floor beside the physical relay housing at the base of the console, prying open the access panel with my multi-tool, the same tool that had saved me once already in this very kind of situation. "Then we go around the lock instead of through it," I said. "If the software will not accept your codes, I can manually reroute the containment relay directly, bypass the digital authorization completely." "That is extremely dangerous," she said. "If you make an error at this proximity, the field could collapse instantly." "It is already collapsing," I said. "I would rather fail trying than succeed at nothing." She held my gaze for one long heartbeat, then nodded and turned back to the console, running interference on the remaining locked systems while I worked. My hands moved fast, despite the sweat pouring down my face from the growing heat, tracing wires and relays I had only ever studied in training manuals, praying my memory served me correctly under this much pressure. I found the manual containment linkage buried beneath 3 layers of casing, exposed the raw connector, and began rerouting the failing field generator directly to the ship's secondary power grid, bypassing Kale's sabotaged authorization sequence entirely. The chamber shuddered violently as I made the final connection, the flickering field around the reactor core stuttering, once, twice, and then, agonizingly slowly, beginning to stabilize, the jagged light smoothing back into a steady, even glow. "Containment restored," Vesera called out from the console, relief flooding her voice. "Reactor stabilizing. We did it." I slumped back against the relay housing, my hands scorched and trembling, my chest heaving with exhaustion and disbelief. For a moment, neither of us spoke, simply breathing in the sudden quiet after the alarm finally cut off, the chamber lights returning to their normal steady blue. That relief lasted exactly as long as it took the chamber's far door to slide open, revealing Kale standing there with 2 armed guards flanking him, his expression twisted with fury at finding the reactor stable instead of destroyed. "You were not supposed to survive this," he said, his voice stripped entirely of the smooth, false charm he had worn in the council chamber. Vasara stepped forward, placing herself firmly between her brother and myself. "You sabotaged this ship," she said, her voice carrying clear and unwavering across the chamber. "You endangered every soul aboard, all to remove me from succession and eliminate a witness who never even wanted to be part of your schemes." Kale's expression darkened further, but before he could respond, one of the 2 guards flanking him stepped forward instead, removing his helmet to reveal features I recognized instantly. It was Draven. "I have recorded every private order given to me over these past weeks," Draven said, his voice grim as he addressed the chamber. "Every instruction to monitor the human, every order regarding the vent trap in engineering, and tonight, the override codes used to disable this ship's containment safeguards. I served this ship faithfully for many years, Prince Kale. I will not allow you to destroy it, or its rightful heir, to satisfy your own ambitions." Kale's composure finally shattered entirely, fury and disbelief warring across his features as he realized the very guard he had trusted to carry out his schemes had instead documented every step of them. Before he could even respond, additional security personnel flooded into the chamber behind Draven, alerted by the very evidence he had gathered, and transmitted the moment containment was restored. The arrest that followed happened quickly, almost anticlimactically after everything that had led to this moment, Kale's furious protests echoing down the corridor as guards led him away toward confinement to await formal judgment before the full council. In the aftermath, standing in the now quiet reactor chamber with the steady blue glow of restored containment washing over us both, Vesera turned to face me fully, her formal composure finally, deliberately, beginning to slip. "I am done hiding what happened between us," she said quietly. "My brother nearly destroyed this entire ship trying to bury one small truth. I will not spend the rest of my reign making the same mistake." "Are you certain?" I asked. "What you are considering could reshape everything about how your people see you." "Perhaps," she said, "but you taught me something that night in my chamber, without meaning to teach me anything at all. You showed me that being seen clearly is not automatically a weakness. It only becomes one if you spend your entire life convinced it must be hidden." Days later, before the full assembled council and much of the ship's crew, Princess Vesera did something no Veyron heir had done in generations. She removed her mask publicly, revealing her true deep blue skin and shifting silver markings for every officer and noble in that chamber to see, standing tall and unflinching beneath their stunned silence. "This is who I truly am," she said, her voice carrying clear and steady across the hall. "I concealed it because I was taught that vulnerability invites destruction. My own brother nearly proved that lesson correct, using secrets and fear to nearly destroy us all. But a human maintenance worker, who owed me nothing and risked everything, showed me a different lesson instead, that honesty, offered freely, can build something far stronger than any secret ever could." The silence that followed felt endless, until finally, one by one, officers across the chamber began to bow, not out of formal obligation, but out of something that looked remarkably like genuine respect. Standing near the back of that chamber, still faintly scorched from the reactor chamber, still very much the lowest-ranked human aboard an enormous alien warship, I found myself smiling for the first time in weeks. I had come to this ship expecting nothing more than a difficult assignment far from home. Instead, I had helped uncover a plot, survived an assassination attempt, stood before a council of an entire empire, and somehow, against every reasonable expectation, helped a princess find the courage to stop hiding from her own people. Visera caught my eye across the crowded chamber, and even without her mask, even with her true face fully exposed to a room full of strangers, she looked more at ease than I had ever seen her before. Whatever came next for either of us, alliance, friendship, or something neither of us had fully named yet, I understood one thing clearly as I stood there, watching her finally stand unguarded before her own people. Sometimes the most dangerous secret is not the one someone else discovers about you. It is the one you convince yourself you must spend your entire life hiding, until someone, by pure accident, walks through the door and shows you that you never needed to hide it at all.